Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to this week's Monday Assembly Ride. My apologies that I'm not on a bike as well. I've come down with the lurgy, travelling back from Portugal. But here we go, getting started with the group ride. So for anybody that is new to these sessions, they're very straightforward. Basically, it's just a pretty chilled group ride, riding at about sort of around 2 watts per kilo. Or less, depending on how you're feeling. This really is just a session that you kind of take as exactly how you want it to be. So the rubber banding effect is on. So yeah, we should all stay together. We're following Geth at the moment, and I'll be able to stay on with the RGT feed for about half an hour until I get kicked off. But that doesn't really matter, because what we will be doing today is I'm going to use this as an opportunity to do some things, show you some resources that were I on a bike, it'd be pretty impossible for me to show you. So we're going to use my condition as a opportunity to cover hopefully some really useful stuff. So with these Monday assembly rides, they are intended at least to be as interactive as possible, particularly the Monday sessions, because they're lower intensity, and a lot of people use these sessions as active recovery. You know, it's well appreciated that many of you guys will do some big miles over the weekend and then need an easier set on a Monday just to chill out. So that's kind of what we've got for you. And the course that we're following is the final 32 Ks of yesterday's Giro d'Italia stage. So that was stage 3. If anybody watched it, like me, you probably fell asleep during it. I generally fell asleep during the stage. It was super boring until about the last 5 minutes, shall we say, being generous. But it can go like that in Grand Tours, can't it? Perhaps one of the reasons that I personally prefer one-day races, in terms of watching them at least. But yeah, so that's what we're on for. I won't give away the result from yesterday's stage in case anybody hasn't watched it, although let's face it, if you go on social media even 30 seconds after the race is finished, every outlet, shall we call them, has the race result straight up. I've never quite understood that, why people put the result up on social media, because it's just always such a spoiler. You know, if you're gonna know the result if you're watching it. Anyway, so yeah, in tonight's session, we're going to be covering event preparation, and as I say, not being 100% and not being on a bike, it allows me to show you a few resources which you may not be aware of, or you may be aware of but perhaps don't know how to use as effectively as you might otherwise do. And this is something that we're doing a lot at the moment with our own athletes, because obviously it's beginning of the triathlon season, beginning really of the kind of the road cycling season in earnest. So we're doing a lot of these sorts of sessions with our athletes, just running through courses, etc. So that's what we've got in store for tonight's session. So if you've got any questions, guys, as I say, hope is that these sessions are nice and interactive. So various methods in which you can get your questions across. There is, of course, those guys that are on the Zoom feed. So if you've never joined the Zoom chat before, guys, basically it's basically just a lot easier to get your questions across. So the guys there often just unmute themselves very quickly and just sort of ask away with the question, or they use the Zoom chat. There is, of course, the chat in RGT. Which I can actually see. I realised that one of the reasons I haven't been able to view it for a few weeks was because I had it turned off. Basically, I get really annoyed with the chat in races, and so I always turn it off, and I just forgot to turn it back off again. I just get annoyed with people saying hello to their mates when you're trying to get ready for a race, so I always turn it off. So yeah, that's why I haven't been able to view it for a while. There you go. So yeah, you can actually get your questions answered on RGT for once, just using the chat feed, or anybody watching us through the various streaming channels. We have that all hooked up, so that any comments you put in, any questions you put in onto the live stream, we will pick those up as well. Just a very quick shout out to our partners who you'll see kind of scrolling across the top. That last one you would have seen is just for some 3-day cycling camps that we're hosting with our partners Champneys, who are a health spa, have locations dotted around the UK. We've teamed up with their Tring location to run a bunch of 3-day cycling training camps, with not just riding around the Chilterns. It's they're fully coached sessions, so really worth checking out. And obviously it's not a bad place to run it out of, getting a nice little massage after 60, 70, 80k ride in the Chiltern Hills, hopefully in the glorious sunshine. So yeah, that was just one I just wanted to quickly shout out. We've got a May date coming up soon. So for the details of that, head to our website, or head to the Champneys website, where kind of the vast majority of the details and the booking can be done. So head to the Champneys website to book on to those 3-night cycling camps. Anywho, right, so we seem to be getting on very nicely with the group ride. Guys rolling out around 2 watts per kilo. As I say, we've got the rubber banding effect on, so it should keep the group together. This is a pretty flat stage. There's one sort of little lump in the middle, where you can see the on the top at the bottom of the RGT stream. There's one little lump where you can see where the red gradients are, but other than that, pretty chilled. Which is funny actually, because Matt, one of our regulars, can't make it this evening, and he's always complaining that I make the courses too hard. So this is the easiest course we've ever done, and he's not able to make it this evening. Quite ironic. Excuse me, I'm just trying to keep my throat lubricated so I don't turn into a croaking frog. So anyway, right, so let's get on with our chat this evening. Do feel free to send in your questions as we go, and I'll stay across all of them. But yeah, basically I just wanted to share a few resources with you and help you out with your event planning. Now, obviously, depending on kind of how seriously you take all this stuff, there's a bit of a sliding scale as to how many of these resources and how much depth you want to go, whether you want to pay for them or not. Because a lot of the resources that I'm going to show you, they do have free features, and obviously, as is always the way with these things, you can subscribe. But what I plan to do is actually just generally go through the free kind of basic features, because I'd say for the vast majority of people that we work with, you don't necessarily need to go into the premium features. Well, you might do, but you probably just buy a month's subscription. Hopefully I don't offend any of the brands that we're about to show. But just firstly, on event preparation, it's worth doing, guys. Okay, even if it's just for a sportive that you're not taking super seriously, or if you don't class yourself as a super serious athlete, it's really, really worth doing. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to show you, obviously we're going to take our time over it, but once you kind of figure out your own little process, this stuff can take, if you really wanted to kind of just rattle through it, it could take you half an hour. I personally obviously take this stuff quite seriously, so I will geek out on this stuff for hours, and when we go through it with our athletes, we try and distill it down a little bit more for them, and we try and cover it in about an hour. But if you really wanted to, you could whiz through some of the stuff that we're about to show you very quickly, once you kind of figured out once you got familiar with the resources and figured out your own little process. And as I say, you can get as deep into it as you want. It doesn't have to be a super geek sesh, but it's super useful to do, even for a little sportive, even if it's just checking the wind direction, wind strength, things like that, checking the course, just so that you know kind of what's coming up. And I think that's kind of the main purpose behind why I wanted to cover this stuff this evening. I imagine a lot of you guys that are watching this have events coming up, and so just going through some of the processes we're going to show you, it can really help take some of the anxiety out of a race, and just getting to that start line, hopefully nice and fit, hopefully nice and conditioned, but also knowing a little bit about the course, knowing a little bit about what to expect. It genuinely can really help. I remember the first time I went through something like this for myself. I found it really motivating, because having a plan in place, I found it, I'm not sure what the expression is, but I felt like I had control over a lot more than I normally felt like I did. And it was little things like when I was out on the bike course, the first time I did this, when I turned into a headwind, I knew that what power I wanted to ride to. I knew that my average speed was going to drop, and I didn't panic. And so whilst I saw all these big units thrashing past me, I didn't panic, because I knew when we turned out of the headwind, it was straight into a climb, and lo and behold, those big units suddenly started going backwards. So it can really help you from a motivational perspective, and keeping you disciplined as well, which obviously we look at this stuff from generally from a triathlon perspective, but I am going to approach it for the vast majority from kind of a pure cycling perspective, because I know a lot of the people that join these sessions are pure cyclists, but we will have a little bit of a triathlete angle at the end. So anyway, let's move on, shall we? So the first resource is a pretty obvious one. So this first one that I'm going to show you is Strava. So what I'm going to be talking to you, so the kind of case study, for want of a better phrase, that I'm going to be using is I'm doing Ironman Maastricht in August. So it's actually not actually a course that I have actually done it before, but they've changed the course a lot. It used to be basically the Amstel Gold course, but they've changed it quite a bit, and they've kept it much tighter, much closer into Maastricht. And as you can see just from the Strava route, there's lots of loops, etc., where they try to shoehorn in little climbs. So this is I'm actually doing the full Ironman. This is the 70.3 route. I couldn't actually find the full Ironman route, which is annoying. But I thought this would actually be a useful process, because I'm kind of actually looking at this pretty much fresh. I had a quick look at this earlier today before coming onto the session, but I've not actually gone into this in super detail. So this is actually a useful process for both of us, and I will be able to show you kind of exactly how I approach these things. So Strava is a really good one to start off with, just to kind of familiarize yourself with the course. And I am often shocked by athletes that don't do this. Don't even look at the Strava course. They so anyone that does kind of Ironman branded events will be familiar with the fact that the amount of course information you get isn't always the best, shall we say. It can be pretty limited. Often you don't even get a GPX file, you just get a PDF with a topo and just a course on a map which looks like it's done in crayon. So yeah, taking the time to find the GPX, finding the time to upload it to Strava, or there are various other platforms that you can use. I know a lot of people prefer is it GPS My Ride, or I can't remember. I personally just use Strava because that's just what I've always used, albeit I know there are some there are potentially other and potentially better resources you can use just for looking at the route. But one of the reasons I really like doing this is because once you upload your GPX file and then you kind of just refresh it, basically it will pull in all the Strava segments on that route, which I personally find super useful, because then it then allows you to start breaking down the course into sections, and probably most notably down being able to isolate the climbs. So on this course you can see it's pretty lumpy. You've basically got 3 lumps, and then in this first kind of lumpy section you got sort of 3 or 4 little peaks within it. So you got kind of, maybe one bigger climb and then three kind of shorter climbs whilst you're kind of riding along the ridge line. Um, and and then what you can do basically is start to look at those segments. And this is just if I was doing, say, like a road race, or maybe even a crit, if the crit course was like a town centre crit, or you know not a circuit crit or something like that, then this could be the full extent of your preparation, just having a quick look at the course. And what you can do is then start to have a little look at the segments. Have a look at, I've isolated some of the climbs. You can start to have a look at them and just start to get a flavour for the course. So this first climb, it's a K&a-half, average gradient of 3.9, and then as you just kind of scroll through it, you can see that 3.9 doesn't really tell you the full story. You've basically got a climb in two sections. You've got this longer one kilometre section for it levels off and then kicks up again for the final sort of 300 meters or so. But you can see within that, we're getting up to around 7% in places. So it's not a 3.9% climb. It's not a 4% climb. It's a 6% climb with a little flat section in the middle before it kicks up again. But if I hadn't already looked at this course, I wouldn't know that climb is like that. I wouldn't know that the climbs on this course are about a kilometre long and they're quite punchy. It's all about kind of knowing this stuff in advance, so then you can prepare for it. And I'll be talking a little bit about how you can take this information and adapt your training accordingly towards the end of the session. But we'll just quickly rattle through the other segments. Like this next one isn't actually the full segment. The climb is actually a little bit longer than this, but the main section is half a kilometre long, and you can see, you talk about 6% in places. Final section is a kilometre long, and this is kind of the daddy of the climbs, where you got sections upwards of 11%. So if we just come back to the main, so that was this final one here, and so basically what you can start to do with even just that tiny, very short, what's that taking us, probably less than 5 minutes, even with that sort of bare minimum amount of information, suddenly you can start to piece things together in your mind. You can see how the course is broken up effectively into 3 sections, I would say, really. You've got this kind of up and down section towards the beginning, this little lump in the middle, and then this lift back up onto the ridge line again before you drop down. And that can be your very simple kind of game plan. And you can just know that once you've gotten through these first 2 sectors, you can roll, pretty steadily through this middle part here. But you've always got to try and reserve something, because of this climb here. That was this third climb segment that we had a quick look at, a kilometre long with over 11%. You're going to have to save some juice for that climb. You can't just go hell for leather all through this section. And so, as a bare minimum, you've already got a very kind of loose appreciation of what the course is going to be like. And so I would say, as a bare minimum, you want to have a look at the course, you want to have a look at the segments, you want to have a look at the climbs. And I don't think any of that is kind of rocket science. Just knowing what the profile of the climbs is like, it can tell you how to approach them. So, I know when it comes to that sort of 11% section on that third climb, that third sector, that's not, 11% isn't really the sort of gradient that you can kind of just spin up. I know I'm going to have to get out of the saddle, and that's going to be hard. And so but that, nevertheless, that's the sort of climb that actually suits me. So that's the sort of effort that I kind of enjoy and I would see as a strength. So then you can start to think about, where can I chase time? Does this course suit me? And I suppose that brings in a pretty important point. Have you evaluated the course before you signed up to it? Because nobody ever does. I always rather amazed by this when athletes don't take the time to uh, look at a course. So we did do a know-how video about some of the things that you want to consider before you sign up for an event. So if you go to our social media, I would generally advise, if you're considering signing up to something, go to that video on our social media, because it might just kind of make you think twice and help you make a potentially a slightly wiser decision, because we see um, some avoidable um, misjudgments, simply because they've seen somewhere they quite want to go on holiday, but not necessarily thought about the event itself, and whether it's appropriate for them, both in terms of the time when it's on, and also in terms of the profile of the route, the climate, etc. So yeah, so dig out that video if you've got the time. I really would recommend some very important stuff to consider before you're going into it. So anyway, moving on quickly. So get Strava, get up, whatever you use to kind of plan your routes and to view segments. So super quick and easy, and give you a good idea of the course, what you're dealing with. So this next one I'm going to show you, it's called Best Bike Split, and this is kind of taking things one step up. Okay, so we use this with our athletes all the time. As I say, there's the free version of this, and then when maybe you're coming up towards your main event, you might want to consider going for the premium version, just maybe paying for a month or so. But this is a super useful resource. Okay, it's created by one of the designers at Training Peaks. It's a totally separate project, which is annoying, because if it was tied into Training Peaks, it would be a really nice addition to Training Peaks. But it's a separate project, and therefore a separate subscription. But it basically, what it is it's a predictor of your bike performance. So we've got that same Maastricht 70.3 course. And basically what you do, so this is just the kind of home screen, your dashboard. You just go through, it wants me to log in again. You just go through setting up your profile. So it does, I'd say probably one of the things to be aware of is that it requires quite a lot of information, and this resource is only really as good as the accuracy of the data going in. Okay, so as an example, I just rushed through this. So I've put in my TT bike. I've got a Shiv, a Specialized Shiv, and I have no idea how much it weighs. But you know, 6 kilos maybe. I have a feeling it's actually a little bit heavier than that, because it's not the lightest TT bike out there. You know, you have to fill in kind of your front wheel type, the type of tube that you're using. So I'm using, I should actually say, a latex tube, and so yeah, you have to do all this sort of stuff, and that is time consuming, but you only have to do it once, and then you can run it over multiple courses. So yeah, taking the time to put in your data all accurately, including your FTP, and that is another reason why we're always going on about why your FTP needs to be accurate, and not inflated, and has to be current, is because when you are planning for your event, particularly if you do use power meter, that FTP needs to be accurate. Otherwise, if it is inflated, you're going to totally cook yourself purely through ego. So yeah, making sure the data that goes into this and all the resources that we're talking about is accurate. It's worth taking the time. And then the really cool thing about this is you can actually search for a lot of really kind of the big races. So for instance, Maastricht 70.3 is on here, and you can just find a course and you search for it. And then obviously if you pay for premium, you can actually just upload a GPX file and use that instead. But we've got Maastricht on here, so we're just going to use the free version. And then basically what you do, once you've filled in your profile, your bike's profile, selected the course that you want to kind of run this over, you go to your race, I've already done this, but I'll update it so I can take you through. And then basically, there's a number of different inputs, and this is where you can kind of start to get really granular, and it depends on kind of who you are and how seriously you take all this as to how granular you want to get with this. Um, but just the very basic stuff. Okay, so you want to kind of just go for default settings, generally speaking. One of the really cool things about this is it will pull in the weather conditions in its calculations. So this race is in August, so I would normally run this. So what I could do is go through to August. And obviously I would really recommend running this a couple of days before, so it pulls in accurate weather reports. And then perhaps the one input you want to take a little bit of time considering over is the intensity factor. So for those that are into kind of bike racing, you know, it can really change quite a lot, because if you're doing a road race, for instance, you don't really know kind of what your power output is going to be, because obviously you've got to react to what's going on in the race. But what I would say is what you can do is just look back at previous races if you've got them, and just have a look at kind of what like the intensity factor and your average power is over the course of those races. Obviously your power will fluctuate massively within that, but just getting a sense of your average power, just so you can run this. Because if you're a bike racer and you're not necessarily doing a time trial, you're doing a road race, all you really want to use this for is to kind of get more and more familiar with the course, and perhaps come up with a strategy for when you might want to attack, etc. For those that are triathletes, there's a really helpful little tip here about what intensity factor you want to use. So long course racing typically has a 70 to 80% intensity factor. Ironman being weighted down at the 70s, and then half Ironman you probably top out at about 80%, and that's, I would say, for well-conditioned, experienced athletes, because riding at 80% of FTP, you know, you're well into kind of zone 3 tempo level, sub-threshold still, but you're riding strong, and you have to be a well-conditioned athlete to be able to run after that. Okay, but nevertheless, we're doing this for a 70.3 course, so we're going to keep that at 80%. And then it does say that, you know, towards the bottom there, if you're doing a short course, you might look to somewhere closer to threshold. I think doing 105% of FTP in a sprint triathlon, I think even that is quite generous, optimistic, because sometimes your legs just do not work after being in the water. So you definitely want to be conservative when you're running this. So we'll run this, well, let's put this down to 75%, shall we? If we're doing a half Ironman, I'd say we're pretty decent in terms of our conditioning, but we might not be, you know, sort of pushing for world champ standard. And it just takes a little bit of a while to load up, but I always turn off the speed because I don't find that useful at all. But then we can start to really look at course, and so you can see what this does on top of what Strava is doing. Suddenly you've got little power targets and little sort of suggestions over kind of what sort of effort you're going to be doing over the various climbs. So just an example, we've come to the first one. We can see that the climb from this kind of power, projected power, the climb is broken up into segments. So you've got these little steps which tell you about the climb, that you're going to have to step it up at various points as you go through. So it has us topping out. So my FTP for this, I think I put it in at about 328. So this is kind of getting me up to, you know, around sweet spot to get over the top of this climb. And you can see he's doing it the same for any of these little kickers, and this second climb, and then the third climb. And so I'm not necessarily suggesting that you'd follow this power plan obsessively, but it does again start to give you another layer of knowledge about the course, and in particular about the climbs. And then perhaps equally as helpfully, it gives you an idea of the sort of power to hold on the flat sections, which is actually where people can burn a lot of matches and waste a lot of energy. So this has got me at around 230 watts for these kind of flatter sections. And so from there, you can start to build yourself a little bit of a race plan in your head. So whenever I'm on the flat sections, my goal, just keep it nice and simple, go and try and hit around 230 watts. And it can be that simple. And then when you get to the climbs, you know you're going to try and keep it sub threshold. But in particular on this final climb, if you remember, it had us upwards of 11%. And so you can see we're getting to around 300 watts there. And so creeping closer and closer to threshold. Now, one other thing I wanted to show you with best spike split is this little doodah on the bottom right hand corner of the graph. So this is actually the wind direction, and this is personally what I think is one of the most useful kind of elements to a resource like best bike split. What it doesn't do, unless you pay for premium of course, is tell you the wind strength, but it tells you the wind direction. So I can just scroll through this and know that for the first sort of, we've got 10, nearly close to sort of what, 16 Ks. That's nearly all kind of cross headwind. That's quite a difficult start to the course, and you've got to try and manage your effort accordingly. And at the beginning of the bike leg of triathlon, that's hard to do because you're kind of all buzzed, all ready to go, and you're all excited about it. And you think it's very hard to try and stay disciplined. But just being able to break up the course like this, bring in the climate, bring in the wind direction, and then correlate cross-referring to the weather reports, so wind strength and things like that, suddenly it just adds that extra layer of understanding, and you can start to ride in a much more sensible manner. The example that I used earlier about knowing where I was going to ride into the headwind and not panicking when I saw my average speed dropping, or seeing my competitors go past me, it's really important. And so you can quickly see how you can use this to start breaking down the course, build yourself a race strategy, something that you can follow, something that's going to give you confidence and control over how you perform. And of course, we're talking about this in a triathlon perspective, but this resource is incredibly useful if you're doing, say, a sportive or a Gran Fondo, or like one of the big gravel rides. There's been a few recently, Dirty Reaver, for example, and Tracker, things like that. So a resource like this is really useful for those kind of big sportives, where you might be. Mallorca was last weekend, 312. That's a great example of a Gran Fondo, which is going to take you to the end of your resources. It is super tough, and so you want to use something like this, even if you're not a serious kind of super geeky athlete. You want to use something like this just so you know how to manage your effort, and you don't have to make it as complicated as we're going to go on to next. But just having this kind of basic level of knowledge of the course, it generally can be the difference between having a good day and having a truly miserable day. Because we use this as an example, starting off the first 15 Ks into a headwind, then straight into sort of 3 or 4 back-to-back climbs. You go too hard during that, that's pretty much game over for you for the rest of the day. So if you didn't look at this course, all the weather, and went straight into this, and blasted your way through the first 30 Ks, you're going to have a tough day. You're going to have a tough day in the office. And I think it's a pretty clear example of how, just by taking a bit of time to look at this stuff, you can save yourself a lot of pain. And ultimately, when it comes to triathlon in particular, your goal really is to get to within fighting distance of the finish. You can't win a triathlon on the bike, really, but you can damn well lose it. By just overcooking yourself and turning your run into a nightmare. And so often that's what we see with athletes before we start to work with them. is that they will go too hard on the bike and complain that they need to get better at running, but when you actually delve into the data, they've just completely cooked themselves on the bike, and they haven't suddenly turned into bad runners. They've just got nothing left when they get there. But just one final thing to talk about with best bike split is you can really drill down into it in terms of the projections that it gives you. So this breaks it down almost by kilometer, and you can see. So if we take that first climb, which takes place at about 16.5 Ks, if we scroll down to 16.5 Ks in, we can start to see how the climb unfolds. You've got an 8.5% sector, and this is a sort of wattage. You're getting close to pretty much at threshold there to try and get over that lump. And obviously that's the level of granularity not everybody's going to want to go into. But some other cool features with this, you can actually download the power profile. You can obviously download the course and put it into RGT using the magic roads, which is always a really good idea. You'll get a good appreciation of the course simply by downloading the GPX file, uploading it to the magic roads, and riding it. Obviously, with a course like this, I know from having done it, there's a couple of sections of cobbles and things like that, which obviously the magic roads can't replicate, and you've got the wind that we talked about, that headwind. But just understanding kind of how the course unfolds, riding it as a magic road is a really kind of useful thing to do. But you can actually if you really wanted to kind of use this as a basis for your race, you can download various different things that can help you with that. So you can download the power profile, the erg profile, and train as if you were doing this exact course. It's not personally something I've done or would do, but why not? You can give this stuff a go. Particularly if you're doing multiple races in a season, you can try this stuff for one race. If it works, if it doesn't work, you can. It's hardly a risk. And then just finally, you've got the kind of the summaries at the side here, just giving you a kind of an idea as to how quickly you're going to do it. Or you could do it on a best case scenario using the intensity factor. And this is perhaps the one thing that most people are really interested in, is the projection as to how long the course is going to take them, so that they can start to build themselves a goal, a race goal, an overall time or what have you. Okay, guys, so that's best bike split. I'm just going to take a quick second to grab a drink, and I'll just have a little check of the various chats to see if anything's come in. Great question. Okay, so the question from Dimitri was, how should one plan the build phase for riding all DAX, Zone 2, Zone 3 rides, 200 to 1200 kilometers long, types of intervals, how long should my endurance rides be? That's a really good question. It's a tough one, really, to answer without knowing, because I think that's actually where you'd want to bring this type of stuff into your thinking. So it would depend on the course. I personally, when it comes to preparing our athletes, what we will do is we will probably, once we've kind of gotten to know them a little bit, and we've got a decent level of data for them, one of the things that we will do is actually run all this stuff, in particular best bike split, over their primary event. And that will give us an idea of roughly how long we think the event is going to take them. It will give us an idea of the types of climbs, etc., the type of terrain that they're going to have to surmount in order to complete the event or perform well in it. And then once we've got that information, once we know roughly how long it will take them, and kind of what they're dealing with in terms of terrain, we'd use that to inform us as to how to structure their build. So as an example, we've got a number of athletes doing Ironman events this year, and they, in terms of their bike capabilities or experience levels, they vary widely, and so we need to make sure that their peak is exactly right for them. So I would suggest running this for whichever event you've got, and using it to work out where you need to peak. Okay, so if you've got a 200-kilometer ride, and let's say that takes you, just as a complete guess, say that takes you like 6 hours. You know, in this instance, you're fortunate because you've only got a ride. You haven't got to run afterwards, so you can be a little bit more aggressive in things like your pacing. So the intensity factor that we used earlier on best bike split, you can perhaps be a little bit more aggressive with that than you would be for a triathlon. But nonetheless, it's still 200 k's, so you can't go too crazy. But yeah, use that to see where you need to peak. So for our athletes, we generally use a 14-week build phase. We find anything more than 14 weeks and people start to get bored. They start to hate the training. That doesn't mean we don't do any training before that, but we kind of we don't ramp it up until that 14 weeks starts. And then within that 14 weeks, every week has a particular focus. And so yeah, I think something like that, just as a very basic kind of template. And then you probably want to look to peak at around 3 weeks, or depending on the event, 3 weeks or so, for an Audax, or a Gran Fondo. It depends how important it is to you as to how long a taper you have. Some athletes respond well to a taper. Personally, I'm awful after a taper. I have to continue pretty much training at quite a high level, otherwise I just feel dreadful come race day. And so yeah, we start to get some more complicating factors in, but just as a basic template, I would just say, get your event, run it through best bike split, with all your data, give yourself an idea of how long it's going to take, and then you can start to work out your build, and you kind of work out where you need to get to, and then sort of work backwards from there. In terms of which type of intervals, yeah, that's a hard one. For basically, it doesn't matter what kind of rider you are. You want to be kind of hitting every energy system. The amount you hit those different energy systems, just depends on on kind of what your event is. So for an Audax, something super endurance based, obviously your primary focus is getting in that long base riding in. But still, you're gonna want to still do some threshold work, some VO2 and some anaerobic work, because if you've got a particularly hard course, there's going to be sections where you're going to need to go anaerobic just to get over the top of climbs and things like that. And also the greater the strength element of your training is, it's going to lift that FTP, and lift your aerobic ceiling. So in terms of the intervals, it's not easy for me to say. Generally speaking, the way we would approach it is, rather than kind of doing the same sort, what we would do is we would try to have kind of at least one sort of strength focus session, so threshold or VO2 max kind of mixed session focus, at least, and then kind of build around that in terms of intervals. Perhaps not making too much sense, but for an Audax rider or super endurance rider, we probably have a mixed kind of VO2 threshold session, and then perhaps sprinkle endurance rides with a bit of anaerobic work, just to help build that strength, but not necessarily focus on it as much as we would with like a crit racer or an e-racer or a road racer who would be doing a lot of high intensity work. I hope that kind of makes sense. It's a really difficult question to answer, and I'm trying to avoid the normal coach's answer of saying it depends, because it really does with a lot of this stuff. But as a starting point, as I say, use something like Best Bike Split to run the course, get an idea of how long it's going to take you, so at least you can start to work on your build from there. And then in terms of intervals and stuff, it's a hard one to answer, I'm afraid. Hiring a coach, getting a good coaching plan, that's usually my incredibly kind of biased view. So that's best bike split. So we've got about a quarter of an hour left of the session. So I'm just going to rattle through a couple more resources. So this is one. This next one I'm going to show you is called My Windsock. Now again, there's a free version and a premium version. I'm just going to show you the free version, and yeah, a lot of these resources kind of do the same as each other, and I think this is super useful for the weather reporting, but I find it very busy and can be quite hard to understand. Like there's a lot going on here on this page, and it's a little bit kind of dazzling. But what basically the main purpose behind My Windsock is pulling in the weather conditions and kind of giving you a really detailed understanding of how that can affect you at various points of the course. So if I just zoom in a little bit, if I can, at least. I don't think it's gonna zoom in. So it won't let me zoom in anymore. But you can see kind of this first leg down to the bottom of the course, which is that first kind of 16k. You'll notice that's all kind of like a pinky red, and that's because we're riding into a headwind. And you can see on the right hand side over here, it's going to tell you kind of like the wind speed and a little bit more about the kind of wind direction, which side of you it's going to hit you on. And also you'll notice at the bottom, it tells you basically what are the primary energy loss factors that you're having to deal with. So the primary one at the moment is wind resistance. You got a 1% gravity, and then you've got rolling resistance as well. And then you can see, I'll just shift forwards, and you can see obviously when you hit the climb, aerodynamics becomes less important and gravity becomes your primary kind of enemy, for want of a better phrase. Oh, sorry. There's a question on one of the live streams. I think the question was what program. So earlier I was talking about this. I was talking about Best Bike Split earlier, Strava originally, and now we're talking about my Windsock. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't know when that question came in. I think it's been there a little while. Yeah, sorry, apologies for that. I didn't see that. Yeah, so this is a really good one. We're going through this in layers of kind of granularity and complexity, and so this is one that I would use for me personally and for kind of our more experienced and elite athletes to really kind of dissect the course. We look at kind of where the wind is going to be at its strongest, and just having that knowledge before you get there, it helps keep you calm, helps keep you on message, helps keep you disciplined. So as I say, people are racing past you, you see your competitors going past you, guys you know you can beat, you don't get carried away, you just let them go, you ride your own race, knowing that either you're going to catch them by the end of the bike leg, or you're going to get them on the run because they'll be barbecued. But for those guys that are sportive riders, Gran Fondo riders, or perhaps road racers, this can be super useful again, particularly for those road racers. This can tell you where to attack. So for instance, the first 15Ks, you're not going to want to put your nose in the wind at all. Okay, you've got the entire like second half of the course, well, 2/3 of the course really, where you've got better opportunities to attack, because tacking into a headwind for this kind of distance, no thanks. So you can start to bring that into your race planning. You start to talk to your teammates and say, look, we're not gonna we can't attack in ones. We're gonna need to attack in ones, twos, and threes. We're gonna need to get a couple of people up the road. We're gonna need people to help bridge, etc., etc. You can start getting super detailed in your race plans, just by knowing actually that's a super strong headwind. Riding that as opposed to riding in the bunch, you're gonna get reeled in no time. Okay, so this is a really good, and then likewise, okay, I've got a tailwind here. It's not super significant, which actually, isn't the worst thing in the world. It means that I might be able to get away a little bit, and the group behind won't be have too much of an assist. Um, you can also start to look at the course in a little bit more granularity as well. So you can see this is quite a technical course. There's lots of turns, etc. So if you are thinking about it from a road racing perspective, yeah, you kind of want to attack when it starts getting technical, because your accelerations out the corners and things like that, they're an opportunity to get away. You hear it all the time on the commentary for the pro racing, out of sight, out of mind. Delaying any attacks to these more technical sections is a really good example of how you can kind of, with a little bit of foreknowledge, use the course to your benefit. And likewise for triathletes, if you're pretty good at your handling skills, you know that these sections are areas where you can push. And I would actually be willing to bet that you could make up quite a significant amount of time simply by pushing out of the corners, accelerating a little bit harder than your competitors might be, because hopefully they've already cooked themselves on that first 15Ks. But it's all this little stuff that you can start feeding into it. We've got athletes that are better than others at cornering, at descending, on technical descents and things like that. And so you can start to look at this stuff and advise them accordingly. So, for instance, we've got one athlete who I'm talking to yesterday who's not great at descending in a bunch. And so, if you were looking at a course like this, suddenly you can start to say, right, well, what we suggest is we get to the front of the bunch and we maybe attack before the climb. And in the expectation that hopefully you've got a few meters on them and you can descend on your own before the bunch kind of gets to you, or attack on the climb so you can kind of get yourself a bit of clear room, so that if people are picking you up on the descent, you're not kind of out the back and then having to chase on again when you get to the flat. So again, we are getting a little bit complex here, but this is how you can kind of start to layer up this knowledge. Okay, so that is kind of the final bike resource that I wanted to show you. We've got just about 9 minutes. Just have a quick little check of all the chats. I've got, before I go into some of the run stuff that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so Geth has just asked about using Windsock for TTs, and I think that's probably one thing I've neglected to talk about, really. All these resources are absolutely ideal for time trials. Okay, this is, depending on how serious again you are, this is the sort of granularity you really want to go into for a time trial. So Geth has asked about CDA, which is a drag coefficient. Basically how much exposure to the wind, how much wind are you having to push through, how best to estimate this. I've got to be honest, it's not something I'm super experienced in. And actually, one of our other coaches, Matt, would be better. He's an engineer by trade, so I'm not even going to try and pretend that I know. But just kind of from my basic knowledge, one of the things you can do with Windsock actually is, if you go for the premium, you can start to stack data, and you can actually start to use kind of data to estimate your drag coefficient. But there are also super basic ways you can do it. So simply finding a section of road, or ideally going to like something like an airfield. There's Bovingdon near me, or just find a section of road with like a pretty steady gradient, 1, 2, 3%, and pretty quiet as well. Somewhere where you don't have to stop for street furniture, traffic lights, etc. And you can start to actually not necessarily work out your CDA, but just start to tinker around with your positioning and things like that. So just hitting the same section of road at a constant power, ideally, the same climatic conditions, so doing it on the same day, and just tinkering with your position and your setup and things like that. You can actually do like a field testing version of testing for your CDA. And there is actually various bits of technology you can use as well, but just as a basic field test, it's a super effective and free method. So if you're, for the same power, riding that little section considerably faster, you can surmise by that your aerodynamic positioning, etc., is improved. But there, in terms of working out that sort of stuff, that's actually perhaps a chat that we'll try and get Matt on for. We have done chats about that sort of stuff, and you can find one on our website called Energy Out, I think it's called. It's a cycle seminar, and Matt actually goes into some of that stuff in a little bit more detail. But perhaps that's something we can cover in a future session. So just very quickly, we've got about 5 minutes before I ring off or run out of voice. Just a couple of quick things for those that are triathletes. So this is a very kind of disproportionately useful resource. So this is called Jack Daniel's VDOT running calculator. And it's spelled the same as the whiskey. It's not, as far as I'm aware, they're not linked. But basically, this is kind of like best bike split for running. Now, there are other kind of running calculators. I find running calculators, frankly, they're pretty rough. It's cycling, because you can use things like power, which is a real-time metric. I think there's just way too many variables going into running to get a really, and you need an elite athlete, I would say, as well. Anyway, but this is actually a really useful resource, so as like a runtime predictor. So what it is basically we always use 5K times, so that's kind of the fitness assessment that we use for our athletes to set their pacings and zones, etc. You can use various other methods, 20-minute time trial. Some people like to use a 10K. You also use marathon and half marathon times to kind of help give yourself a prediction as to what you're likely to run in a triathlon, etc. But just to use this very quickly in its basic format. So what we've done here is just selected a 5K option. Let's just say we did it at a 4 minutes per kilometer average, just as a random number to use. So if we just kind of use that, what that's going to do, so normally you just come up with this page, and that tells us that's a 20-minute 5K, okay? And then, but what we can do is it can extrapolate out from there to kind of predict roughly what sort of time you could do at various other distances. So in a 10K, 41 and a half minute 10K, up to marathon really. And obviously there's some huge kind of assumptions involved with this. It's assumed that you've got very good conditioning, that you have got the base mileage in your legs, etc. You've tapered well, your fueling's on point, etc. But I've actually found this to be really useful, and particularly in terms of helping to give our athletes a race strategy. What you can do with this is start to create yourself a pacing strategy for the bike, for the run, or just use it for a marathon if you're not doing a triathlon. But you can start to use it to give yourself an A, B, and a C plan. And that's kind of the main point I wanted to kind of come to when using this as a resource. For our athletes, we always make sure that they have an A, B, and a C plan when it comes to the run, because with all the best will in the world, the best training, etc., often, even if they pace the bike perfectly and their nutrition's been fine, it can just be pot luck on the day. Sometimes things just go wrong, sometimes you're just on a bad day. I had one last year where everything was absolutely fine. I was just on a really bad day, and there's no excuse for it. So having an A, B, and a C plan is always super important. And so you can start to kind of play around with this. So for instance, if you were doing an Ironman, you want to, in terms of your marathon prediction, you want to knock off sort of 10+%. So, or if we just go back for let's use the half marathon. If we've been talking about 70.3 all this time. So let's say we've got, if we were just doing a normal half marathon, we've got a 1 hour 31 prediction. And then suddenly we can start to feed this stuff into our training and into our race planning. So this is an example of a brick session that my athletes have got next week. And I've set this to 4 minutes per K for the pacing zones. And so you can start to suddenly get them you kind of get yourself training at race pace and testing different things out. So this session in particular is about getting our athletes used to stepping down in pace, because so often at the beginning of the triathlete people go off too fast, and actually they need to just kind of get a hold of themselves and actually slow it down until they get to within fighting distance of the finish line and then finish really strong. And so yeah, this is just the point of this was just showing how you can start to transfer the information that you've got into your training. So race pace brick sessions, race pace turbo sessions. You could even try and do this over the course. So we talked about earlier how you could upload the GPX file to a Magic Road. This doesn't need to be done in erg mode. In fact, we rarely do race pacing sessions in erg mode unless there's a particular reason for it. And so trying to hold, this race pace effort over the actual course that you're going to be riding, that can only be useful. And so that's just a very quick example of how you can start to pull in the stuff that you're learning into this. So for example, this default person's half marathon average pace would be 4:21. Okay, if they were doing a fresh half marathon, doing a 70.3 half marathon, the top end of their race pace would be 4:18, and that is, very, very optimistic to do a half marathon PB. It has happened, but very, very optimistic. Instead, really, what they'd be looking to do actually is taking at least 10% off that normal half marathon pace and looking to run more at around 4:27 minutes per K. Okay, so that's just a very quick example of how you can start to use some of this information to begin building some training sessions. And I'm not saying you would do this sort of stuff every week, but particularly as you're getting towards race day, you do this stuff more regularly so that it becomes ingrained. And your race pacing is almost instinctive. So just a very quick run through, guys. So all we talked about is running the course through Strava or whatever you use to map your routes or what have you. Just going quickly through the segments so you get an understanding of the course, how it unfolds, how hard you're going to have to work, how spaced out they are. We talked about saving some juice for this final climb. Then talked about best bike split and how useful a resource that is, breaking it down, giving you some power targets that will give you an idea and even fuller idea of how the course unfolds. It also pulls in the wind direction, which you can start to use in terms of building your strategy. And then the other other things you can pull in the power profile, pull in the GPX file into Magic Roads, etc. And then the final one for the bike is Mind Windsock, which, as Guest says, is super helpful when it comes to time trials. But it also just takes you a little bit deeper into kind of things like the wind direction and other climatic considerations, rain, etc. At the moment, this has it dry, but obviously on a day where it's not, you're going to want to factor that in, and this is just a resource that will help to kind of factor that stuff into your thinking. And then just lastly, Jack Daniels is this running calculator, and this is quite a fast and loose calculation of predicted run times. I wouldn't suggest this is exact. but it's a good way of kind of getting you into the right ballpark and helping you to come up with a bit of an A, B, and a C plan. And then just lastly, I showed you can start to put together some kind of focused race preparation on the basis of the stuff that we looked at, and in particular going back to Dimitri's question about Audaxes. You can use this stuff to get a prediction of roughly how long the event is going to take you, and then from there you work out where you need to peak in order to be ready for it and kind of build backwards. And so you can actually use these resources to kind of create the entire foundation of your training. So they're incredibly useful. Anyway, I've been waffling on for too long now, so I will stop there, but I will just pause very quickly in case anybody has got any more questions, and I will just have a quick little check of the chats. But I imagine everybody's had enough of me talking. Okay, any last questions? No. Okay, cool. All right. Well, if no one's got any questions, just remember, guys, you can always email us, info@react.fitness, or you can drop us a message on social media. We're always very happy to answer questions between sessions. But yeah, hopefully that was useful to everybody, and have yourself a lovely evening, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next week. Hopefully I'll be on a bike and my voice will be a little bit less croaky. But there you go. Take care, everyone.